Hello everyone, this is Highlander from MTG Cardsmith doing another custom Magic the Gathering card review, and today I'm reviewing another card by our friend VULTURE! And let's see what we got here. We got a card called Darunia's Awakening. Okay, now immediately, now VULTURE, you may not have watched my previous videos, or at least not all of them, but I always take points off for using art on your cards that doesn't look like Magic art. And especially video game screenshots are bad, right? Because it's just very distracting on the card. Like, it's the first thing I see. I mean, the art is always the first thing you see when you look at a card, right? And if your card looks like this, you're just automatically like, well, this isn't a real Magic card, you know? So yeah, I would try to not do that. I mean, whatever, do what you want. It's your cards, but at least when it comes to me rating the cards, I'm going to take points off for art. So just keep that in mind. Now, obviously, this is a Zelda reference card. Reference cards are also pretty dangerous, so let's see if this one sort of passes the test. So this is a double red legendary awakening. Okay, so this is a new mechanic. Reveal up to one awakening from your opening hand, and only if you performed a mulligan. Then put it onto the battlefield under your control. Okay, so if you mulliganed, you can put this on. You can put one awakening from your hand onto the battlefield. When an opponent plays a land or casts a spell, exile Darunia's Awakening. It deals 3 damage to that opponent. Okay. So I'm not sure. Okay, so here's sort of, okay, so there's a few issues we got going on with this card. One is that you've created a new card type here called Awakening. And there are no rules in Magic for how this card works. You say you can put it onto the battlefield, but so basically the way I see this card is it's an enchantment. This card should be a legendary enchantment. Okay. Now, if you, what I would suggest that you do is do legendary enchantment - awakening. That's probably the way you should do something like this. Introducing a new card type just makes no sense here, because this is an enchantment. It behaves like an enchantment. You know, so, like, the only real reason you want to include a new card type, like super type like this, is if you have somehow found a way to create a card type that behaves differently than all the card types that exist in Magic, meaning enchantments, artifacts, and enchantments are already very similar, by the way. Creatures, instants, sorceries, planeswalkers. Did I get all of them? I think I got all of them. And those pretty much cover all the bases. You'd be really hard pressed to find a card that behaves in a way. Oh, they also have emblems, by the way, which is kind of, not really, but so it's like, don't do this. Just call this a legendary enchantment - awakening, and it'll not only will it work, it'll function the exact same way here, but if you make an enchantment, people understand how this card works. Because right now there's no rules dictating how an awakening actually works. It looks like it works like an enchantment, but I have no idea. It's an awakening, right? Okay, so that aside, okay. This card does not seem very good to me, and here's why. So let's say you're not doing this awakening thing, okay? So this awakening thing only occurs if you've mulliganed, and that's kind of a neat idea. I think that's kind of a neat idea, right? Is sort of like, helping people out who mulligan. I think that's a reasonable thing to do. You do have to be a little bit careful with that. So my friends always make fun of me because I don't let people when we play together. I don't let people take free mulligans. Okay, I know some people are fine with that, but here's sort of my perspective as more of a game player rather than a designer. Okay, so the reason the mulligan rule exists is so that you can't just keep mulliganing until you have the exact hand that you want, right? Otherwise, you could just mulligan in infinity times until you have like the perfect hand, right? And that's clearly degenerate. So that's why there's sort of a downside to doing so, right? Now, mulliganing is really punishing in limited. If you mulligan, your win percentage goes down by a lot, actually. So in that sense, I don't mind helping out a person who has mulliganed. But in constructed, it's actually a lot less punishing to mulligan. And the more you make mulliganing less bad, the less people are incentivized to build their decks correctly, if that makes sense. So, for example, let's say there was no mulligan. You know, let's say there was infinite mulligans, and you always went to 7 cards, right? You could play like one drop, 1 2 drop, 1 3 drop, 1 4 drop, and then a bunch of 5 drops in your deck or something, and you could always try to mulligan. You could just mulligan infinity times until you got the right curve, right? So my whole point is that mulliganing, okay, sometimes yes, sometimes you just get unlucky and you have to mulligan. But often mulliganing can be a symptom of something that you could have done better, which is, and people don't often think about this, but did you shuffle your deck enough? A lot of people do not shuffle their deck enough, and they mulligan a lot more often than other people do because they'll end up with pockets of lands in their deck, right? Another thing, did you build your deck correctly? Do you have the correct curve, right? These are things that will heavily affect the amount of times you'll need to mulligan, which is why I tend to find mulliganing a good rule and why I generally don't allow free mulligans, because I feel like you're not. It kind of makes me sound like an ass, okay. Let me just put it this way: I would never take a free mulligan. Because it doesn't. You don't learn anything from that, right? It's kind of the same thing as like people saying like, oh, I made a misplay, can I take that back? Now I will sometimes allow people to take their plays back if they want to, but I will never do it because I want to learn from my mistakes and get better. Okay. Anyway, that I just went on a super long rant about mulliganing. And I apologize for that. Anyway, so my whole point to saying all that is the idea of helping out a player who has mulliganed in limited, I think is a good idea, because in limited, again, it's very punishing. In constructed, it's less punishing, and having cards that help you out if you've mulliganed makes it even less punishing, and I don't think that's a good thing. So I think there's still design space for doing something like this, where you get some sort of a bonus if you've mulliganed. I think that's an interesting design area, and I think it's worth exploring. However, I would be careful on what cards you put it on. Now, I don't particularly think that this card is a bad card to put this on, but I think that you should only put it on. I would probably only do that, on cards that are not meant for constructed, that are meant more for limited. That is where I would tend to put those cards. Anyway, so let's get to the actual card design here. So I don't think this card is particularly strong, because, okay, so here's one thing. So if you don't get the Awakening and you play this on 2, this is legendary, by the way, so you can only ever have one of these out, which is another kind of strike against it. So if you play this on 2, you're basically playing a 2-mana Lava Spike that your opponent has control over. Okay? And that's not a good card, right? I mean, okay, yes, you can play this on turn 2, which means you're not developing your board, by the way. And yeah, your opponent's probably going to play a land and take the 3 damage. Okay, and if you're playing a burn deck, that might be fine. But like, imagine you're playing a burn deck and you're losing, and your opponent's at like 3 life, and you're like, all right, time to top deck my lightning strike, and you draw Darunia's Awakening, you play it, and your opponent is still ahead, and now they have enough lands to cast their spells. They're not going to cast any spells, and they can still win the game because you top deck Darunia's Awakening, and they have control over when they take the damage, right? Also, if you mulligan, this is like not a card that you want if you mulligan. Like, if you mulligan, do you really want a Lava Spike in your hand? Not really. Like, you want a card that's going to help you unmulligan, right? Something that gives you like a card advantage. Something like a... one moment. What's the name of that card? The one that exiles the top 2 cards. What's it called? Light Up the Stage. Yeah, that one. Like that's the kind of card you want to draw in your games where you've mulliganed. Is cards that help you unmulligan, right? This is like in anything but the most dedicated burn deck. This is essentially card disadvantage. So it's like you've almost mulliganed twice in a sense, because yeah, okay, you get to cast it for free, but I mean, you're dealing 3 damage to your opponent. It's not really, almost never worth a card. The only time it is in a deck that literally just wants to play Lava Spikes, which is very, very narrow. And in a deck like that, you don't want to play Darunia's Awakening for the reasons I mentioned. You want to play actual Lava Spike, and also cards that can hit your opponent's creatures. So that being said, yeah, I'm not a big fan of this one, unfortunately. I think there is cool design space for something you've tried to do here, which is, again, giving a bonus for mulliganing, helping people unmulligan. There's definitely room for that, I think, if you're careful. But I think there's just a lot about this card that I find to be not the best idea. I think the card itself is very weak. I think, like, why is this card legendary? Why is it a new card type? It's just not a good card, even in the decks that would want this kind of effect. So yeah, so that's my kind of spiel on this card. If I had to rate this card, I would probably give it a 4 out of 10. I think you should keep exploring this Awakening idea. Or let me rephrase. I think you should keep exploring the give me a bonus if I've mulliganed mechanic. I think that's an interesting design space that hasn't really been explored much. I think there's definitely something there, and I'd love to see you explore that some more and show me some cards that are maybe geared toward limited. But I don't think this one quite hits the mark. So I'll give this one a 4 out of 10. And thank you guys for watching.